Charlie Kirk was a prominent and often controversial figure in American politics. As the founder of Turning Point USA, he rose to fame as a young conservative activist, building a massive following through college campus tours, social media, frequent appearances on news programs. He was known for his strong opinions and his ability to mobilize young conservative voters across the country. His voice was a powerful force within one wing of the Republican Party, making him both a celebrated leader to his supporters and a target of intense criticism from his political opponents. His influence extended far beyond campus activism, shaping political discourse on a national level. The assassination of Charlie Kirk sent shockwaves across the United States, marking a dark and deeply significant moment in the nation's recent history. His death was not just the loss of a public figure, it represented a violent escalation of the political tensions that have been simmering for years. For many, the event was a terrifying confirmation that the country's deep divisions had crossed a dangerous line, moving from heated rhetoric to deadly violence. The incident immediately raised urgent questions about the safety of public figures and the overall health of American democracy, prompting widespread calls for calm and reflection from leaders on all sides. This event is important because it forces a national conversation about the consequences of political polarization. Kirk's high profile meant that his death was instantly politicized, with various groups interpreting the tragedy through their own ideological lenses. The assassination highlighted the real-world dangers of dehumanizing language and the growing acceptance of violence as a political tool. The tragic event took place on the evening of September 12, 2025. Charlie Kirk was in Phoenix, Arizona, his hometown, to deliver a speech at a local university auditorium. The event was well attended, filled with students and supporters eager to hear him speak. According to witnesses, the atmosphere was energetic and positive. After his speech, Kirk stayed to sign books and take photos with attendees, a common practice for him. He was known for being accessible to his followers, often spending extra time to engage with them directly. The evening seemed to be concluding as planned, with no outward signs of the danger that was about to unfold. The shooting occurred just after 9:30 p.m. local time, as Kirk was leaving the auditorium through a side exit. He was walking toward his vehicle in a secured parking area, accompanied by two private security guards. It was at this moment that a lone gunman emerged from the shadows between two parked cars. The assailant fired multiple shots in quick succession, striking Kirk before his security team could fully react. The sudden chaos and the sound of gunfire plunged the area into panic. Police and emergency services were on the scene within minutes. The Phoenix Police Department received the first 911 calls at approximately 9:32 p.m., reporting shots fired. Upon arrival, officers found Kirk with critical injuries and immediately began administering first aid. Paramedics rushed him to a nearby trauma center, but tragically, his wounds proved to be fatal. He was pronounced dead shortly after arriving at the hospital. The police quickly secured the large crime scene, which spanned the parking lot and the exit of the auditorium, and began the painstaking process of gathering evidence and interviewing witnesses. In the immediate aftermath, a massive manhunt was launched for the suspect, who had fled the scene on foot. Police established a wide perimeter and used canine units and helicopters to search the surrounding area. The investigation quickly became a top priority for local law enforcement and federal agencies, including the FBI, which was called in to assist due to the high-profile nature of the crime. The investigation into Charlie Kirk's murder yielded several critical pieces of evidence that quickly pointed law enforcement toward a primary suspect. One major breakthrough came from forensic analysis at the scene. Investigators recovered a disposable coffee cup where the shooter had apparently waited. Lab techs extracted a clear DNA sample from the rim of the cup. The genetic material was entered into the National DNA Database, CODIS. Within hours, CODIS returned a match to Thomas Lang. Lang's DNA was already on file from a prior arrest at a violent protest. Digital forensics produced another crucial lead. The FBI got warrants and searched Lang's electronic communications. They found a series of encrypted text messages from Lang in the weeks before the assassination. The messages were exchanged with a small group of political extremists. The texts showed a growing obsession with Charlie Kirk. Lang called Kirk a threat to democracy and discussed his travel schedule. 2 days before the shooting, Lang texted, "The time for talk is over. Someone has to act." During a raid on Lang's small Phoenix apartment, detectives found something chilling. Tucked in a book on political philosophy was a handwritten note. Detectives bagged the note as evidence. The note read less like a confession and more like a rambling manifesto of motives. It accused Kirk of spreading dangerous propaganda and fascist ideas poisoning young Americans. Lang wrote he had a moral duty to silence a voice of hate to protect the country's future. Together, the DNA match, the incriminating text messages, and the handwritten note formed the foundation of the case against Thomas Lang. That combination let the FBI build what they called an ironclad case, leading to Lang's arrest 48 hours after the shooting. Thomas Lang, the 28-year-old man charged with the assassination of Charlie Kirk, was largely unknown to the public before the incident. Federal investigators quickly pieced together a profile of a deeply troubled and increasingly radicalized individual. Lang grew up in a middle-class family in the Midwest and was described by former classmates as quiet and introverted. He attended a state university for 2 years where he studied political science but dropped out before completing his degree. It was during this time that he reportedly became heavily involved in fringe online political forums where he was exposed to extremist ideologies from the far left. Lang's descent into radicalism appears to have accelerated over the past few years. He had a history of minor arrests related to political protests that had turned violent. Law enforcement sources revealed that he was on an FBI watch list as a person of interest due to his online activities and association with known extremist groups, but he had not been deemed an imminent threat. He moved to Phoenix about a year before the assassination, living a solitary life with little social contact outside of his online communities. His social media profiles, now taken down, were filled with angry tirades against conservative figures and institutions, with a particular and growing fixation on Charlie Kirk. The possible motives for the assassination were purely ideological. He viewed Kirk not as a political opponent, but as a direct and existential threat to the country. In his manifesto-like note, Lang wrote that he believed Kirk's rhetoric was inciting violence and undermining democracy. He saw himself as a righteous avenger acting to prevent what he perceived as a greater harm. This type of thinking is common among lone wolf terrorists who become convinced that their violent actions are justified and necessary for a greater good, a deeply distorted and dangerous worldview. Psychologists and terrorism experts who have analyzed the case suggest that Lang fits the profile of a lone actor extremist. These individuals often feel isolated and alienated from mainstream society and find a sense of purpose and belonging within radical online echo chambers. Over time, exposure to a constant stream of extremist content can lead to a complete break from reality where violence seems like a logical solution. The investigation suggests that Lang acted alone in planning and carrying out the attack, but his radicalization was fueled by a much broader digital ecosystem of hate and political intolerance. In the hours and days following Charlie Kirk's assassination, the political response was swift, intense, and deeply divided. On one side, conservative leaders expressed outrage and sorrow. They framed the attack as an assault on free speech and on all conservatives. Former President Donald Trump released a statement. He called Kirk a true patriot and a fearless warrior. He said Kirk was murdered by a radical leftist for speaking the truth, and blamed hateful rhetoric from his opponents. Senator J.D. Vance echoed the sentiment, saying the left's war on conservative voices has turned deadly. Conversely, leaders on the left universally condemned the violence, but many urged caution against politicizing the tragedy. President Biden addressed the nation. He called the assassination a horrific act and an attack on all Americans. He urged unity and an end to the poison in our politics and demanded a full investigation. Some progressive commentators pointed to Kirk's history of inflammatory rhetoric, saying the divisive climate he helped create mattered, even as they condemned murder. Conservatives reacted with fierce backlash, accusing them of blaming the victim. The public reaction on social media mirrored the divide, but in a rawer, more volatile form. Platforms like X became digital battlegrounds. Kirk's supporters flooded the internet with grief and anger, and hash justice for Charlie trended for days. A torrent of misinformation and conspiracy theories also spread, with some falsely claiming a false flag operation. Some fringe accounts celebrated his death, prompting widespread condemnation and calls for platforms to police hateful content more aggressively. This fractured response highlighted the lack of common ground in American discourse. Even during a national tragedy, the country couldn't unite in shared grief or condemnation. Instead, the assassination became ammunition in the culture war. News outlets were attacked from both sides, accused of downplaying the killer's political motive, and accused of exploiting the tragedy for ratings. The event laid bare deep-seated distrust and animosity where every event is filtered through a partisan lens. The assassination of Charlie Kirk, while shocking, did not occur in a vacuum. It represents the most extreme manifestation of rising political violence in the U.S. over the past decade. The FBI has repeatedly warned of domestic violent extremists. This trend has included mass shootings, planned bombings, violent clashes at protests, all fueled by an increasingly toxic and polarized political environment. High-profile incidents like the January 6th attack show how quickly anger can escalate into violence. Experts point to several factors: the rise of social media, echo chambers and radicalization in isolation, the constant stream of inflammatory rhetoric from some political leaders and media figures, when political opponents are portrayed as evil, corrupt, and existential threat. That dehumanizing language lowers the psychological barrier to violence. It can make someone like Thomas Lang see a political figure not as a person, but as a symbol that must be destroyed. This trend is not limited to one side of the political spectrum. While the suspect in Kirk's assassination was motivated by far-left extremism, law enforcement data shows threats have come from across the ideological landscape. Far-right militias, white supremacists, anti-government extremists. Public officials at all levels have reported a dramatic increase in threats. School board members, members of Congress. This climate of fear has a chilling effect on democracy, discouraging people from participating in public life or expressing their political opinions. The assassination of a major political figure like Charlie Kirk is a tragic landmark in this escalating trend. It serves as a wake-up call to the very real consequences of political hatred. As the nation processes the immediate shock of Charlie Kirk's assassination, the focus now shifts to the legal proceedings and the broader implications for the future. The primary criminal investigation is centered on Thomas Lang, who is now in federal custody. Prosecutors are building their case for a trial that is certain to attract intense national media attention. The FBI evidence, including the DNA evidence and Lang's own writings, make the case against him appear strong. However, the investigation is not over. Federal authorities are continuing to probe his connections, looking to determine if he had any accomplices or if he was part of a wider network of extremists. Beyond the criminal case, the assassination has sparked urgent discussions in Washington about the safety of public figures. Congress is expected to hold hearings on the rise of domestic extremism and the security protocols for individuals who, like Kirk, are influential but do not receive official government protection. There are renewed calls for legislation aimed at curbing online hate speech and holding social media platforms more accountable for the radicalization that occurs on their sites. These debates will be contentious, balancing concerns over free speech with the need to prevent future violence, a dilemma that has long plagued lawmakers. One of the most significant lingering questions is whether this tragedy can serve as a turning point for the country's toxic political culture. In the immediate aftermath, there were calls from many corners for a de-escalation of rhetoric and a return to civility. However, history has shown that such moments of potential unity can be fleeting. The deep-seated polarization that fueled this act of violence remains firmly in place.